Step away from the vehicle right now. I'm not going to ask you again.
That's what Private Security Officer Kurt Braddock said to a black woman who had done nothing more than lean toward the front badge of a vintage Ferrari at a charity auction in Monaco. He grabbed her wrist without warning. He accused her of tampering with the car. He told a room full of collectors and socialites that thieves often disguise themselves as guests at luxury events. What Kurt Braddock did not know, what no one in that glittering showroom knew, was that the woman he was publicly humiliating was the anonymous donor who had placed that very Ferrari into the auction to raise money for pediatric cancer research. Her name was Imani Price. She was 39 years old, the founder and CEO of Argenta Capital Partners, a private equity firm managing over $2.3 billion in assets across 3 continents. The Ferrari she had donated, a 1961 Ferrari 250 GTS-WB Berlinetta, one of only 165 ever built, was valued at $8.7 million. She had given it freely, without conditions, without putting her name on it, in honor of her late brother, Marcus, who had died of leukemia at the age of 11. And Kurt Braddock put his hands on her in front of 200 people. Before we continue, where are you watching from? What city? What country? Drop it in the comments. And if you believe that no one should be treated like a criminal for walking into a room they were invited to, hit that like button and subscribe. We're going to tell you exactly what happened that evening in Monaco and how one man's assumptions cost him everything. Let's go back to the beginning. Imani Price was not the kind of person who announced herself when she walked into a room. She had built her career on precision, patience, and a quiet confidence that most people misread as reserve. Born in Baltimore to a high school teacher and a postal worker, she had earned a full scholarship to Wharton at 17, graduated summa cum laude at 21, and spent the next 18 years climbing through the ranks of private equity until she launched Argenta Capital Partners at 34. Within 5 years, the firm had offices in New York, London, and Singapore. She sat on the boards of 3 nonprofits. She had been profiled in Forbes twice and in the Financial Times once. None of it mattered to her as much as the pediatric oncology wing at Johns Hopkins that bore her brother's name. Marcus Price had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia at age 8. For 3 years, Imani watched her parents empty their savings, sell their car, take second and third jobs to cover co-pays and treatments that insurance would not touch. Marcus died 2 weeks after his 11th birthday in a hospital room decorated with paper stars that Imani had cut out herself. She was 14. She made a promise that day, not the kind you say out loud, but the kind that rearranges everything inside you. She would make enough money to ensure that no family went through what hers did, and she would do it without ever asking for recognition. That was why the Ferrari was anonymous. That was why she never attended ribbon-cutting ceremonies at the clinics she funded. That was why her name did not appear on the donor wall at Johns Hopkins until the hospital's board insisted, and even then she asked for the smallest plaque they had. Imani had a ritual on the anniversary of Marcus's death each year. She would take the day off from Argenta, drive to a small cemetery in West Baltimore where Marcus was buried next to their maternal grandmother, and sit on the bench across from his headstone for an hour. She never brought flowers. Marcus had always said flowers were boring. She brought a Snickers bar, his favorite, and left it on the grass beside the stone. Then she went back to work. She had done this every year for 25 years without exception, including the year she closed a $400 million acquisition that same week. Her executive assistant, a woman named Denise Tran, who had been with her for 9 years, was the only person at the company who knew where Imani went on that day. Denise never asked. She simply cleared the calendar and rescheduled whatever needed to be moved. That was who Imani Price was. A woman who had turned grief into purpose, who had turned purpose into a career that generated enough wealth to change outcomes for thousands of children she would never meet. And on the evening of March 15th, she was about to walk into a room where none of that would matter to the man standing between her and the car she had given away. The 1961 250 GTSWB Berlinetta had belonged to her private collection, 12 cars in total, all meticulously restored, all kept in a climate-controlled facility outside of Geneva. She had purchased the Ferrari at a Sotheby's auction in Monterey 4 years earlier for $7.2 million. When the Fondation Lumière, a Monaco-based charity dedicated to funding pediatric cancer research across Europe and Africa, approached her about a major fundraiser, she offered the car without hesitation. The only condition: her name would not appear anywhere. The donor file would list her as anonymous, private collector. She did not want applause. She wanted the car to sell for as much as possible, and she wanted every cent to go to children who needed it. The auction was held on the evening of Saturday, March 15th, at the Salle des Étoiles, a grand event space overlooking the Mediterranean in Monte Carlo. The guest list included 214 verified attendees, collectors, philanthropists, tech founders, old money Europeans, and a handful of celebrities whose presence guaranteed media coverage. Tickets cost €5,000 per person. Tables of 8 went for €50,000. The Ferrari was the centerpiece, displayed on a raised platform under precision-calibrated halogen lights, surrounded by velvet ropes with a discreet placard reading, Lot 47, 1961. Ferrari 250 GTSWB Berlinetta. Donated anonymously for pediatric cancer. Research. Imani arrived at 7:22 p.m. She wore a black silk dress with long sleeves, a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, and low heels. No logos, no diamonds, no entourage. She had flown in from London that morning, checked into the Hôtel de Paris, and spent the afternoon reviewing quarterly reports for Argenta before changing for the event. She came alone. She preferred it that way. Now, let's talk about Kurt Braddock. Braddock was 44 years old and had worked in private security for 11 years. He had been contracted by the event organizers through Monaco Prestige Security, a firm that provided personnel for high-end galas, yacht parties, and VIP events along the Côte d'Azur. Braddock's assignment that evening was straightforward: monitor the display vehicles, ensure no one crossed the velvet ropes, and coordinate with local police if needed. He had a radio, a suit, and an earpiece. He did not have arrest authority. He did not have the right to physically restrain anyone. His job was to observe and report. But Kurt Braddock had a pattern. In the 3 years he had worked for Monaco Prestige Security, 4 formal complaints had been filed against him. All 4 involved guests of color at luxury events. In one incident, he had stopped a Qatari businessman from entering a private lounge at a yacht show, insisting the man's invitation was forged. It was not. In another, he had followed a Brazilian woman through a gallery opening for 40 minutes, eventually asking her to open her handbag, which contained nothing but a phone and lipstick. A third complaint came from an Indian tech executive who said Braddock had blocked his path to a VIP section and demanded proof that he belonged there. The fourth was from a Japanese art collector who reported that Braddock had stood behind her for the duration of an exhibition, making her feel surveilled and unwelcome. All 4 complaints had been filed with Monaco Prestige Security. All 4 had been reviewed by the firm's operations manager, a man named Patrice Duval. All 4 had been dismissed with the same notation. No actionable evidence of misconduct. Officer was performing standard security duties. Duval had never interviewed a single complainant. He had never reviewed footage. He had never spoken to Braddock about the pattern. He had simply closed the files. So when Imani Price stepped past the velvet rope at 8:14 p.m. and leaned toward the front of the Ferrari to inspect the badge, the Cavallino Rampante, the prancing horse emblem that she knew intimately because she had personally supervised its restoration 2 years earlier, Kurt Braddock saw exactly what he always saw: a black person who did not belong. He moved quickly. He crossed the showroom floor in 4 strides, reached past the rope, and grabbed Imani's left wrist. Not a tap, not a gentle touch. A grip, firm enough that she felt his fingers press into the tendons above her hand. "Step away from the vehicle," he said. His voice was loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Right now." Imani turned to face him. She did not pull away. She did not raise her voice. She looked at his hand on her wrist, then looked at his face and said calmly, "Take your hand off me." Braddock did not release her. Instead, he leaned closer and said, "I've seen your type before. You come to events like this dressed up, hoping no one notices when you slip something into your pocket or mess with the merchandise. I'm not falling for it." The words landed like a slap, but not just on Imani. 4 guests at the nearest table turned in their seats. A woman in a green gown set down her champagne flute. A man in a navy dinner jacket reached for his phone. Imani pulled her wrist free, firmly but without aggression, and took half a step back. "I have every right to be near this car," she said. "I am a registered guest at this event. I suggest you check your guest list before you make assumptions you can't take back." Braddock did not check the guest list. He did not reach for his radio. He did not consult anyone. Instead, he raised his voice, loud enough now for a dozen tables to hear, and said, "This is exactly how it works. Thieves dress up. They pretend to be guests. They wait for security to look away, and then they make their move. I've been doing this for 11 years, and I know what I'm looking at." A murmur moved through the room. At a table near the center, a Swiss banker named Christoph Keller turned to his wife and said, in a whisper loud enough for 2 adjacent tables to hear, "He cannot be serious." His wife, Marguerite, was already holding her phone at chest level, recording. At the bar, a bartender named Alain paused mid-pour and watched. He later told investigators that in 6 years of working high-end events in Monaco, he had never seen security personnel physically touch a guest. Imani remained still. Her posture did not change. Her breathing did not quicken. Those who stood close enough to see her face later said her expression was not one of fear or humiliation. It was focus. The same expression she wore in negotiations when the other side thought they had leverage, and she knew they did not. "I would like to speak to the auction director," she said. "Please bring him here, now." Braddock laughed, a short, dismissive sound that several witnesses later described in their written statements as contemptuous. "The auction director," he repeated, as though the request itself was absurd. "Right. And I'm supposed to believe you know who that is? People like you always have a story, always have an excuse. You're going to stand right here until I decide what to do with you." "People like me," Imani repeated. She said it quietly, but in the growing silence of the room, her voice carried. She let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then she said, "I want you to remember that you said that. I want everyone in this room to remember that you said that." A woman at a nearby table, later identified as Dr. Hélène Vasseur, a cardiologist from Paris and a longtime donor to Fondation Lumière, stood up and said, "Excuse me, but this woman has done nothing wrong. I've been watching from the moment she entered the room. She simply leaned toward the car. That is all." Braddock turned to Dr. Vasseur and said, "Ma'am, I need you to sit down. This is a security matter, and it does not concern you. It concerns everyone in this room." Dr. Vasseur replied. She did not sit down, but Braddock was past the point of reason. The attention, the phones, the stares, the growing murmur of disapproval did not make him reconsider. It made him double down. He turned back to Imani and said, "You're not going to talk your way out of this. You were tampering with that vehicle, and I'm not going to let you invent some story to avoid the consequences." He reached for his radio and said into it, "I need backup at the main display platform. I have a suspected tampering incident with Lot 47, requesting immediate assistance to escort the individual from the showroom." The word escort rippled through the crowd. More phones came up. More people stood. A man near the back of the room, later identified as James Whitford, a British car collector who had flown in from Surrey specifically to bid on the Ferrari, called out, "Let the woman speak, for God's sake." Braddock ignored him. He turned to two junior staff members who had arrived from the side entrance, a young woman named Céline Durand and a young man named Thomas Benoit, both event coordinators in their late 20s who had been hired by Fondation Lumière for the evening, and said, "Please remove this woman from the showroom. She is not authorized to be near the display vehicles." Céline hesitated. She looked at Imani, at the pearl earrings, at the silk dress, at the calm, unwavering expression, and then at Braddock, whose face had gone red above his collar. She had worked 14 events with Monaco Prestige Security. She had never seen an officer behave like this. She looked at Thomas. Thomas gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. "Sir," Céline said carefully, "I think we should check with the director before—" "I didn't ask for your opinion," Braddock cut her off. His voice had taken on a sharp edge. "I asked you to escort her out. Do your job, now." Céline did not move. Thomas did not move. The room was watching. Imani raised one hand, not in surrender, but in the way someone might call for a pause in a conversation that has gone off the rails. "You are making a mistake," she said. Her voice was steady and unhurried, the way it always was when she was certain of what she knew. "I am asking you, for the last time, to bring the auction director here before this situation becomes something that none of us can walk away from." But Braddock was already past that point. The attention of 200 people was on him, and in his mind, backing down would mean admitting he was wrong. He had spent 11 years in this industry, trusting his instincts, and his instincts had never been questioned by anyone who mattered. He stepped forward, extended his arm toward the exit, and said, "Move, now. The auction starts in 8 minutes, and you are not going to be here when it does." Imani did not move. She stood her ground with the same quiet resolve that had carried her through board meetings where men twice her age tried to shout her into submission, through fundraising galas where donors assumed she was the caterer, through a career built in rooms where people looked at her and saw everything except who she actually was. What happened next took 11 seconds. From the far side of the showroom, moving quickly through the crowd with a leather folio pressed against his chest, came a man in a charcoal suit. His name was Laurent Mercier. He was 56 years old, the director of Fondation Lumière, and the organizer of the auction. He had been in a back office reviewing final bid registrations when Céline sent him a text. Security issue at lot 47. Guest being removed. Something is wrong. Mercier pushed through the last cluster of guests, saw Braddock standing over Imani with one arm extended toward the door, and stopped. His face changed. Not anger, confusion. He looked at Imani, then at his folio, then back at Imani. "Madame Price," he said. The room went silent. Not the gradual kind of silence where conversations trail off one by one. The instant kind. The kind where 200 people stop breathing at the same time. Braddock turned. "You know her?" Mercier did not answer Braddock. He looked directly at Imani and said, "Madame Price, I am so sorry. I don't understand what is happening here." He opened the folio. He held it so that Braddock and the guests closest to the platform could see the page inside. It was the donor file for lot 47. At the top, in typewritten letters, it read, "Donor Imani Price, status, anonymous, per donor request. Item 1961, Ferrari 250 GTSWB Berlinetta. Purpose, pediatric cancer research in memory of Marcus Price, 1987 to 1998. Mercier looked at the crowd and said, in a voice that needed no microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, I must inform you of something. The Ferrari you see before you, lot 47, the centerpiece of tonight's auction, was donated anonymously. The donor asked that her name not be made public, but given what has just occurred, I believe she deserves to be recognized. This car was given to us by Madame Imani Price, the founder and CEO of Argenta Capital Partners, in memory of her brother Marcus, who lost his life to leukemia at the age of 11. Every euro raised from its sale tonight will fund pediatric oncology programs across 4 countries." He paused. Then he added, "Madame Price is not a thief. She is the reason this auction exists." The silence held for 3 full seconds. Then it broke, not with applause, not yet, but with a sound that several guests later described as a collective exhale. The kind of sound a room makes when it realizes it has been watching something terrible and has just been given permission to feel the weight of it. Braddock's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Imani, then at Mercier, then at the folio, then back at Imani. His hand, the one that had gripped her wrist, hung at his side as though it no longer belonged to him. Imani looked at him for a moment. Then she turned to the Ferrari. "The badge," she said, quietly enough that only those within a few feet could hear. It was mounted incorrectly during the display setup. The left pin is seated a quarter turn off center. It's been bothering me since I saw the photos this morning. She stepped past the velvet rope. No one stopped her this time. Leaned down and adjusted the cavallino, rampante badge with 2 fingers. It took her 4 seconds. She straightened up, looked at the badge, nodded once, and stepped back behind the rope. The room erupted. 200 people rose to their feet. The applause started at the front tables and rolled backward through the room like a wave. Dr. Vasseur was crying. James Whitford was clapping so hard his palms were red. Céline was pressed against the wall with her hand over her mouth. Thomas had set his clipboard down and was applauding with his eyes closed. Braddock tried to speak. He turned toward Imani and began. I didn't know. I'm sorry, Mercier cut him off. He did not whisper. He did not pull Braddock aside. He stood in front of 200 witnesses and said, Mr. Braddock, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Please leave the premises. Your employer will be contacted tonight. And I am announcing now, in front of every person in this room, that all security personnel associated with this event will undergo mandatory retraining in anti-discrimination protocols before they are permitted to work at any Fondation Lumière event again. Braddock stood motionless for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the service exit. No one said a word to him. No one looked at him. He disappeared through the door and into the corridor beyond, and the door closed behind him with a sound that several guests later described as final. And then the auction began. Lot 47, the 1961 Ferrari 250 GTS-WB Berlinetta, donated by Imani Price in memory of Marcus Price, opened with a starting bid of 5 million euros. Within 4 minutes, it had passed 8 million euros. At the 7-minute mark, 2 bidders were locked in a back and forth that pushed the price to 11.4 million euros. At the 9-minute mark, James Whitford raised his paddle and called out 12.5 million euros, a number so large that the auctioneer paused to confirm. Whitford nodded. The gavel came down. 12.5 million euros, a record for any single lot at a charity auction in Europe that year, every cent directed to pediatric cancer research, enough to fund 3 new oncology units, 12 research fellowships, and a family support program that would serve an estimated 4,000 households over the next decade. When the gavel fell, the room stood again. But this time, the ovation was different. It was not surprise. It was not relief. It was something closer to reverence. 200 people stood and applauded, not because Imani Price was wealthy, and not because she had endured a humiliation with dignity, but because she had walked into a room where she was treated as though she did not belong, and turned out to be the person who had made the entire evening possible. Imani stood at her table, nodded once, and sat down. She did not make a speech. She did not wave. She picked up her glass of water, took a sip, and waited for the next lot to be announced. Now let's talk about what happened after. Monaco Prestige. Security terminated Kurt Braddock's contract within 48 hours. Patrice Duval, the operations manager who had dismissed all 4 prior complaints, was removed from his position the following week after an internal review revealed that he had never investigated any of the complaints and had routinely failed to review available footage from prior incidents. 3 other officers with documented complaint histories were placed on indefinite suspension pending review. The firm issued a public statement acknowledging systemic failures and oversight and committing to a full overhaul of hiring, training, and complaint review processes. An independent ombudsman was appointed to audit all future complaints. Imani did not file a lawsuit immediately, but 3 weeks after the event, acting on the advice of her legal team, she filed a civil complaint against Monaco Prestige Security, citing assault, defamation, racial discrimination, and negligent supervision. The complaint detailed not only the events of March 15th, but also the 4 prior complaints that had been ignored, establishing a pattern of discriminatory conduct that the firm had failed to address. The case was settled 7 months later for an undisclosed amount. Sources close to the proceedings estimated the settlement at approximately 1.8 million euros. Imani directed the entirety of the settlement to the Marcus Price Fellowship, a new program she established to fund medical students from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing careers in pediatric oncology. The fellowship's first 5 recipients were announced the following spring. Fondation Lumière issued its own statement within days of the event. Laurent Mercier, speaking to Le Monde, said that the incident had forced the organization to confront failures in its own vetting of security contractors and to implement new standards for all future events. A new policy was announced. All contracted security personnel would be required to complete a minimum of 20 hours of anti-discrimination and de-escalation training before being assigned to any Fondation Lumière event. A Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board was created, composed of 6 members from various countries and backgrounds, to review all aspects of event planning and execution. James Whitford, the collector who purchased the Ferrari for €12.5 million, gave a brief interview to Autocar magazine 3 weeks later. He said that he had come to Monaco intending to spend no more than €7 million on the car. He said that after watching what happened to Imani, he decided that the car was worth more than its market value. It was worth whatever it took to make the evening mean something. He said he planned to display it in his private collection in Surrey with a small plaque reading, "In memory of Marcus Price, 1987 to 1998, donated by his sister, sold for what it was worth." As for Imani Price, she returned to London the morning after the auction. She went back to work at Argenta Capital Partners. She did not give interviews. She did not post on social media. She did not seek attention for what had happened or what she had given. When Forbes reached out for a comment, her office replied with a single sentence: "Ms. Price prefers to let her actions speak for themselves." But the videos spoke too. At least 9 separate recordings of the incident were shared across social media platforms within hours of the auction. The longest and most widely viewed, a 4-minute clip recorded by Dr. Hélène Vasseur's husband from their table, showed the full sequence. Braddock grabbing Imani's wrist, his accusations, his refusal to listen, Mercier's arrival, the reading of the donor file, and the moment Imani fixed the badge. Within 1 week, the combined views across all platforms exceeded 34 million. The clip was featured on BBC News, CNN International, France 24, and Al Jazeera. It was discussed in editorial columns in The Guardian, Le Figaro, and The New York Times. It was shared by 3 members of the European Parliament and by 2 heads of charitable foundations who cited it as evidence that racial profiling in luxury spaces remained a pervasive and under-addressed problem. Kurt Braddock never worked in private security again. Multiple firms across the south of France confirmed that his name had become synonymous with the incident and that hiring him would pose an unacceptable reputational risk. He applied to 9 private security companies in the 12 months following his termination. All 9 rejected him. His photograph had been circulated alongside the story in every major European publication that covered the incident. A recruiter at one firm in Marseille later told a journalist, off the record, that Braddock's name had become a cautionary tale in the industry, a shorthand for exactly how not to conduct yourself in a client-facing security role. Last reports placed him working at a logistics warehouse outside of Nice, loading pallets for roughly half his former salary. He had moved out of his apartment in Beausoleil and into a smaller flat in La Trinité, 19 kilometers from the venue where he had grabbed Imani Price's wrist. Patrice Duval resigned from Monaco Prestige Security before the internal review was completed. His resignation letter, portions of which were later obtained by Monaco Matin, contained no acknowledgement of wrongdoing and no reference to the 4 complaints he had dismissed without investigation. He has not held a management position in the security industry since. Former colleagues described him as someone who believed that complaints from guests of color were simply the cost of doing business in luxury environments, an attitude that, once exposed, made him unemployable in an industry increasingly aware of the legal and reputational risks of racial profiling. and in the lobby of the Pediatric Oncology Wing at Johns Hopkins, the one that bears Marcus Price's name. A new photograph was added to the wall of donors the following autumn. It shows Imani standing next to the Ferrari on the night of the auction, moments after fixing the badge. She is not smiling. She is not posing. She is simply standing. One hand resting lightly on the hood of the car she gave away so that other families might never go through what hers did. Beneath the photograph, in small letters, it reads, "For Marcus, always." If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that grace under pressure is more powerful than any title, any badge, or any assumption, subscribe to this channel. We will keep telling these stories until the world learns to see people before it sees color.